With that, Collin, all yours. And just let us know when you need lights. We'll take care of that.
Okay. So thank you, Jim, for that glowing introduction. I feel the love right now. I feel the warmth. It's like when I go to Georgetown. It is absolutely fabulous to be with all of you today. I got a briefing quickly on the morning session. Absolutely fantastic stuff. And obviously the timing of this topic couldn't be better. I'm thrilled to be with you for your third annual symposium, and I'm excited that it continues to grow every single time. But stormwater is at the heart of pretty much every challenge we face right now as a state. When you think 30 years from now, the kind of questions that folks are going to be wishing we had dealt with now, they're going to be related to water, it's going to be related to surface water and surface water management. Whether you're concerned about water quality, habitat, or looking at kind of climate resiliency, it all comes back to the way we manage stormwater. And so over the last few years, we've obviously had a huge focus on this, going back to the Surface Water Task Force and great work by Frank and Randy and his whole team with the new regulations. And the question is, how do you take advantage of all the work that's been done to start getting projects on the ground? Because now that the stormwater regs are done, and hopefully we'll get to the lawsuit fairly quickly, and now that the on-site regs are almost completed, there aren't a whole lot of more policy tools that we have at our disposal when you're ratcheting down nutrients. I mean, you can still tighten those things up, but we're not going to regulate your way to water quality in the state beyond those statutes that we're continuing to tighten up. I mean, it's really going to come back to money and projects and resources. It's money broadly defined, not just like in terms of cash for projects. We're really kind of thinking about the way we do the exact projects that were up here just a few minutes ago for many of the students, and making those kind of best practices on the ground scaled up across the entire state. This is a huge question. I mean, and I think the question that for all of us is, how do we move the kind of the primacy of clean water, being able to manage the velocity and the volumes that we're talking about on the surface water side, into a much kind of greater elevated state in terms of public policy priorities for the state. I would argue that cleaning up our waterways is arguably one of the best economic development investments that we can make in this state. If you look at the places that have embraced their waterways, that have made investments in cleaning up the watershed, that have put buffers in, that have kind of done native vegetation or other types of improvements, and then kind of built on those for with trails or parks or other types of amenities, the property values around those have gone up astronomically. So when you think about the work that like Lyle Jones and the team and John Schneider's shop has done over the years along the St. John's, I mean, like those improvements, when we're talking about kind of the next iteration of those improvements right now, I mean, they have a stabilizing impact on the economic resiliency and the values of a lot of the properties that are around. You think about places like the Mississippi River in Milford, you think about some of the work up at the riverfront in Wilmington. I mean, places that have embraced their waterways have really made investments in the long-term economic competitiveness of their communities in ways that many other communities haven't quite embraced yet. And now the challenge for us is not just thinking about it as just kind of a nice physical amenity, but how do we actually improve the underlying health of these assets in a way that makes sense? And it's not just nutrients, but we still have toxics in many parts of our state, way too many fish advisories. We'll be talking about a project in just a minute that actually gives us the potential to remove most of the fish advisories in the state within the next 10 to 15 years. I mean, we'll still have our challenges in the Brandywine, we'll still have some challenges in the Christina. Because of an innovative partnership, which I'll get to, we've come up with kind of a new way to address some of these problems. And so for this group, I really want this group to really be thinking big over the course of this day and in the weeks and months ahead. I firmly believe that over the next generation, you can really turn the tide on water quality in the state. I mean, we can lift almost all the fish advisories in the next 10 to 15 years with the right investments and the right projects on the ground. We're seeing more and more improvements on the wastewater side, and we've got some innovative ideas for how to finance more projects there. The big funding hole that I do see is on the stormwater side. I see a way to have the $100 million that we need for toxic removal. I see a way to finance the $600 million worth of needs on the wastewater side, a couple $100 million of needs on the drinking water side. But the surface water, stormwater needs really haven't even been characterized at that level, and it really goes back to not just the municipal projects and those opportunities, but getting all the public lands in a place where we're really modeling best practices. And it's many of the same natural system projects that you saw here, the green infrastructure projects that we talked a lot about. We have great models that are popping up, but it's not a common occurrence enough. I mean, one of the most innovative parts about the regulations that Randy spearheaded was that really trying to drive towards a performance standard, and then being a little more agnostic about how we achieve that standard, so you can have the flexibility and kind of innovation in the marketplace to use all these different kind of green infrastructure approaches in ways that simultaneously meet our volume and velocity goals, but also improve water quality, provide better habitat, and really kind of enhance the quality of life rather than just having another stormwater pond that everyone's afraid somebody's going to fall into, or that frag's going to kind of take over. And so it's a huge opportunity. And you think about the work that's been done through the partnership with Delaware Estuary, the Center for Inland Bays, all the folks at UD. I mean, there's lots and lots of good projects going on. I mean, DNS has been doing some good work with some local communities like Seaford. The challenge now is scaling it up. And so I really want folks to think today about how do we kind of begin to turn the corner. So we're not talking about pilot projects anymore. We're not talking about just another living shoreline pilot or a rain garden pilot or other types of green infrastructure, but that we really build the capacity, both within governments and within the private development world, that this just becomes the default position. And I think it is going to require money. I mean, there are needs for significant resources. We can talk about stormwater utilities, and obviously there's been kind of some success in Wilmington. The Newcastle County discussion has been stalled through, 3 different county execs and one of them twice. And trying to figure out ways to actually get some of these practices on the ground. And one of the biggest concerns that I have is that if we don't come up with innovative ways to finance these projects, you'll continue in kind of additional funding coming from the state level, you'll continue to run into this roadblock at the local level where they're unable to get political support for referendums to raise additional revenue for these kind of projects. And so we had a great meeting yesterday of the kind of reconstituted Water Infrastructure Council, which is the old Clean Water Advisory Council combined with the oversight for the drinking water program. And so there's a subgroup from this committee that was asking this exact question. And it was looking at what are the lessons we can learn from Maryland? Are there things that we can learn from their experience with their clean water via the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Fund that we could replicate here in Delaware? And there's other states that have done different things, but for like 10 cents a day per household, we think that we could actually put ourselves on a pathway to meet all of our surface water, wastewater, drinking water, and restoration needs over the course of 15 to 20 years. And in kind of a commensurate amount from business. I mean, it's a big number, but it's not a big number. I mean, maybe that raises $15 to $20 million a year. That's I didn't do the math right. That's 6% of what we spend on prisons in the state. And that's just for water quality that affects everybody. I mean, it's I don't know, 0.2% of what we spend on education in the state. I mean, in terms of like the scale of the challenge and the importance of water quality, the amount we spend on it is ridiculous. And we've done remarkable work, and I'm grateful that so many DNREC folks are here. These folks have done more work squeezing blood out of a stone from EPA funds and clean water projects and trying to figure out innovative ways to get projects on the ground. But the pace that we're on, we're talking decades, right? We're talking decades and decades, and I'm not downplaying at all the time it takes from a BMP to actually get nutrient appropriate levels within groundwater tables. I mean, a lot of that's going to happen slow, and a lot of it's going to happen in generations, but there's things that we can do much more quickly if you had more projects on the ground. And so before I kind of do the rest of my remarks, I wanted to pull up a quick video of a project that hopefully some of you have heard about. It's our Mill Lake Restoration Project. And I think it's really DNREC at its best. It was an innovative idea by a bunch of folks across many different divisions and sections, really trying to come up with a way to clean up a fairly PCB-laden waterway, Mirror Lake. So this is right behind the DNREC building, behind Fraser. You can see it as you're coming into the Capitol complex. Fish advisory, not particularly safe. We have, but you have this incredible resource, really close to the urban center in historic Dover. And so there's kind of a choice, right? Do you spend a ton of money trying to dip it out and try to dredge it? And then even if you do, could you physically get the equipment there? And then where would you put? Please. Don't make me sign it. It's not my sign in. Do you take the money, do you figure out a way logistically to be able to dredge it out, and there's issues with how you stage equipment, where you actually put the spoils out of the fact, or you try to come up with a different technology. And so we worked with the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, came up with this innovative carbon injection technology. We'll go through some of the details in the presentation, but rather than looking at a 50, 60, 70 year restoration, if the system was allowed just to kind of work on its own, we think within 3 to 5 years, this might be a fishable waterway again. And so with that, let me turn it over to the video just for a second. It's about a 3.5, 4 minute video that kind of talks about the type of innovation that I think is possible if there is dedicated funding to ensure that there's that predictability to be able to deliver projects on the ground.
Welcome to Mirror Lake, The lake is a part of the tidal St. Johns River, a river that flows from Dover's Silver Lake past Delaware's Legislative Hall and into the Delaware Bay at Bowers Beach. The health of Mirror Lake has been in decline for several decades due to stormwater runoff and sedimentation, invasive plant species, and contaminants in the bottom sediments that accumulate in fish. Restoring Mirror Lake is the largest and most ambitious part of the final phase of the Silver Lake Park Revitalization Project, a multi-phased restoration plan to improve water quality and protect the banks of the river and lakes.
The plan that we've developed is ambitious and involves two pieces. One is to remediate the sediments in the pond, and two, to restore some of the habitat.
We landed on an in-situ treatment technology that's been developed by a university professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, right up the road.
And the idea here is to use activated carbon, which is used very widely in drinking water purification, in aquaria, for example, to keep the fish healthy. We are using that in a very large scale here, where the carbon is going to be applied in a pelletized form, which is the sedimite, which is carbon with clay and sand. And these pellets are going to be applied in the lake, and then these carbon then is going to soak up the pollutants so that the fish don't get the pollutants.
And we'll broadcast the pellets over the lake surface. They will sink to the bottom. Over a few weeks' time, they'll kind of dissipate or disintegrate a little bit and spread that activated carbon across the bottom of the lake.
Mirror Lake has been under a fish consumption advisory for at least 20 years due to contamination.
If we do nothing, we project it would take another 20 to 30 years before we could lift the fish advisory. We expect after treatment that we'll be able to get a 90% reduction or greater contamination level in the fish within 3 to 5 years. That is our goal.
In addition to the remediation, the project also includes several habitat improvements and restoration activities, including the conversion of an existing sandbar in the lake into an intertidal wetland.
Well, the sandbar that's in the lake right now is natural. That's what Mother Nature, she wants it to be there. If we were to remove that, Mother Nature would still want it there, and the mechanisms would place the sandbar right back where it is. And we're actually going to enhance the sandbar and embrace the sandbar and convert this area to an intertidal wetland.
By planting native species on the sandbar, the project will help to stabilize the bar and also improve water quality.
At low tide, you'll be able to see some of that. There'll be nice flowering plants.
We're also going to stabilize the bank on the western side of the lake where Fraser's restaurant is. The bank there has been undercut severely and will continue to do so. So we'll be installing what are called core logs. It's a natural material that will be double stacked and will prevent further erosion on that side.
DNREC is keeping project costs in check by using volunteer labor where possible. Invasive species removal and some general site preparation work is being conducted by Delaware's boot camp program, as well as by AmeriCorps volunteers. The majority of the labor required to broadcast the sedimite into the 5-acre project area is coming from DNREC personnel from every division within the department.
The volunteer labor that we're utilizing from DNREC staff should save the project anywhere on the order from $100,000 to $150,000.
The Mirror Lake project is a partnership that includes Dover's Silver Lake Commission, the City of Dover, all divisions within DNREC, the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and hundreds of citizen volunteers.
This project is going to be the largest of its type anywhere in the country that applies the particular carbon product that we're going to be using. To our knowledge, Delaware is the first state in the country to try this technology. Again, it's ambitious, and we have every expectation that this will give us what we hope, and that is to be able to remove the fish advisory in this system within 3 to 5 years.
So I hope you get a sense of the project, and two of our rock stars, John Cargill and Rick, came to me about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, and said, we think there's a way to do a watershed-wide assessment of all our toxics and begin to have a remediation plan, but it's going to take leveraging resources from Water Acts and federal resources, leveraging resources from HISCA, our Hazardous Substance Cleanup Act, the Brownfields program, and kind of combining those resources, combined with volunteer labor, to try to get projects on the ground. And that's really the thought I want to leave you all with today. I mean, it is absolutely fantastic to talk about policies, but where the rubber meets the road is trying to figure out how to make those policies actually drive change on the ground. And it's much easier said than done. There's been remarkable progress the last few years. When you think about the work of the Clean Water Advisory Council to set up what they call the Conservation Grants, the Conservation Loan Program, which allowed municipalities that are willing to take on a conservation project to actually get a lower interest rate and then get a grant corresponding to the value of the reduced interest rate to do a conservation project on the ground. Where they get kind of two for the price of one. Their debt service stays exactly the same, and so they're not paying any extra money, but they get these extra great projects. And so the first one was a land protection project right here in Kent County. But the second one, which I'm very, very excited about, is the South Wilmington Wetland Project, which has been talked about for probably 6 or 7 years with a management plan for the coastal program and a whole bunch of stakeholders. But it really didn't get off the ground until we were able to come with some dedicated funding. And so between PISCA dollars, Brownfield dollars, as well as this grant that was able to basically create additional revenues without increasing the debt service of the city, combined with other grants and some money from the partnership with the Delaware Estuary and the Nature Conservancy, we're able to hopefully get a project on the ground in the next couple of years where you normally would have taken all of us kind of beg, borrowing, and stealing for a decade, trying to cobble together small grants before you can do anything real. And so we were able to free up $4 million for this project by adjusting the interest rate of a $36 million loan for a massive wastewater plant upgrade that they were making to deal with their biosolids challenges. It's that kind of innovative thinking that we're going to need to replicate over and over again. And we're seeing a lot of interest, and we're seeing more and more folks apply for surface water planning grants to kind of see what their needs are. We're seeing more folks looking at different kinds of projects and trying to do innovative technologies. But there is this gap between kind of the intent and the desire to try to deliver this product versus the technical expertise to actually get them on the ground. And that's really where I think this group comes in, and is very uniquely suited to do that. Because I mean, if we can get some of the resources flowing, and like I said at the beginning, I do feel strongly that this should be a major priority for the administration, and hopefully we'll be hearing a lot more about that in the months ahead. But if you do have some of these financial mechanisms moving, then you need the ability to deliver projects in a timely way on the ground and show the performance is actually greater than the traditional gray infrastructure that we've often kind of relied on in many parts of the state and around this country. And so with that, I really want to just emphasize again that we need to continue to talk about the need for funding, but it's more than just funding, it's also the resources, and looking at leveraging private resources, public resources, volunteers, and really trying to do what Delaware does best, which is try to figure out a way to marshal kind of all of our collective resources towards a common goal to get projects on the ground more quickly. I mean, the example of this Mirror Lake project is phenomenal in many ways, in that we were able to shave probably 20% off the cost by partnering with the Department of Corrections, with AmeriCorps, by using folks across the entire agency to all pitch in and do a day's worth of work on the project. I mean, to save $150,000 worth of labor costs allows us to, first of all, get the project done this year instead of having to wait for that additional funding. But also we're building technical capacity inside the staff, right, inside all the volunteers. And all of a sudden there's another one. There is no learning curve for the next project for those participants. They can all of a sudden become the teachers and then replicate that success other places. And that's why I am optimistic that with sufficient funding, we could use the same technology, assuming the right kind of assessment went on, to replicate this up and down the state, and then really have really remove a lot of these fish advisories in a matter of years, and something that was not considered achievable just a few short years ago. And so there are significant opportunities for funding. If there are projects that you're trying to get done from various folks, let us know. Let myself know. Let Frank know. Let folks know from the Clean Water, the Water Infrastructure Council, have creative ways to try to get projects on the ground. I'm very, very concerned about some of the federal cuts and what that's going to mean for some of our programs. But at the same time, if we could have some of these dedicated funds like we're talking about, it will go a long way to make these projects much more predictable and much more self-perpetuating up and down the state. And I want to end where I began, which was, when folks look back, they're going to be looking at these few years when we were kind of fully aware of the climate science, kind of knowing what lays ahead, whether it's increased precipitation, more variable temperatures, more extreme storms, or sea level rise. And the states that take early actions now to figure out the financing mechanisms, the states that make those investments to make themselves more resilient, are the ones that are going to come out much further ahead. They're going to be much more economically competitive. They're going to be much stronger and just really much more equipped to face the challenges that we're going to see. And so I think a lot of the pieces are in place here. Some of the ingredients that we're missing really all come back to funding and leveraging these resources. But the fact we're taking on these questions head on is something that's not happening in every state. The fact that we have such great leadership at the university is something that isn't kind of, uniform across the entire country. The fact that we have all kinds of business organizations in this audience, as well as municipalities, as well as different folks in different parts of this web, this ecosystem of the water ecosystem of the state, if you will, is something that's unique to Delaware. And so if any state can kind of leverage and marshal those resources to put real projects on the ground up and down the entire state, it's us. And so I think that's the challenge I hope you all leave with today, is let's raise the importance of this issue. Let's make it very clear that whether you're doing it for climate science reasons, whether you're doing it for water quality reasons, habitat reasons, economic development reasons, that water needs to be at the top of that list. We have underinvested in water infrastructure in this state horribly over the last 20, 30 years. It's amazing we've been able to do as much as we have with the few resources we have had, but to really kind of take the next leap and start talking about improvements in the course of years and not decades, it's going to require a different approach. But the only way it's going to get done is not just if DNREC's beating that drum and kind of ringing that bell ourselves, but all of you individually are raising that issue. So think about opportunities to talk to legislators, raise the issue in the media, just be talking about the importance of these kind of investments. Because in many ways, the squeaky wheel does get the grease. But if we can make the case that these investments are going to put people to work, they're going to have all these other economic benefits as well as all these environmental benefits, it's something that's very hard to vote against, even in these tough political times when folks are always worried about increasing anything that could affect anybody. We need to make this so attractive that folks are afraid not to be supportive. And if we get to that point, we can have some of the progress that we've seen in some of our adjacent states, and then we'll get projects done more quickly because that's what we do here in Delaware. So again, thank you so much for being here. I'm hoping folks get outside at least a little bit. This is a great site. And for those of you that haven't been here before, there's a great little boardwalk and some really great exhibits in the other part of the building. This is one of the National Estuarine Research Reserves. We're very proud to have it. But again, thank you for what you're doing. Thanks for thinking about these big issues, and I look forward to all your questions. So thank you very much.
We do have time. Tom was ahead of schedule. We have plenty of time.
Very early on.
Take advantage of this opportunity. Lisa.
I don't know if I missed it in the video, but are the PCBs binding and then staying on the bottom? They're just coming out of the filter and then, or is it actually going through a chemical process where it's changing? Or?
No, it's a binding process. And so, John, do you want to jump into that?
That's exactly right. Essentially absorbs the toxic chemicals. There's other toxic chemicals in there as well as PCBs. And so the carbon kind of caps the contaminated sediment, and then cleaner sediments will fill in on top of the sequestered chemicals.
Building on that quickly, Marion, isn't there a pilot project going on at DelDOT using activated carbon and stormwater treatment, not necessarily for the PCBs, but...
Yeah, that project is using biochar, country litter biochar, which is another form of carbon. It's a little different than activated carbon.
Right. Same idea to pull in the nutrients out from a stormwater basin. So, I'm sure you have some more.
Could you quickly go over that innovative, where you were playing with the interest rate? Was that the state giving a break on the interest rate to?
Yeah, so I didn't explain that well.
I kind of lost.
Yeah, so going back, several decades, there's a Clean Water State Revolving Fund. We get federal money. It's a 4-to-1 match. We provide up to 20% every year. There's almost $300 million worth of money in this revolving fund. And typically we have an interest rate it's very, very attractive. Very, very attractive. In most cases, 3%, a little bit more, depending on kind of where the market is. What we decided working with the council was to offer lower interest rates, to say, maybe going down by a full point, going down by 100 basis points, from maybe 3.5 to 2.5, or even down to 2. And then saying that, but rather than having that just result in lower debt service, lower loan payment, that we actually say, look, keep your loan payments the same, but we'll give you what would have been the value of that stream as an upfront grant. And then so you'll have an addition, instead of having a $36 million loan at 3.5%, you'll have a $40 million loan, but the extra $4 million will be in the form of a grant, but the debt service on all of that combined now will be exactly what it would have been for the smaller single project. And so by doing that, you free up these additional resources, you get a project on the ground on day one, or in the first couple of years. And the cost of the state is the avoidance of some other project somewhere else. And so, it's good to the state's bottom line. There's a little less interest going into the account, so there's a long-term kind of implication on the revolving fund. But the idea of getting the project done quicker in a way that doesn't expand the the municipality's borrowing needs doesn't expand their debt service payments, becomes very attractive. And we're hopeful that, we've had several communities apply for surface water planning grants recently. You have 15 municipalities, I think standards are somewhere. We have 15 communities are going to need MS4 permits, trying to figure out how to have these tools and maybe even refinance some previous debt as a way to get projects on the ground. Could become one of the most important project delivery mechanisms that we have. Because a lot of communities are just terrified of taking on more debt, and so if we can restructure existing debt and provide some additional grants, and that could be a huge way to get some projects on the ground quickly, show their value, and then help them scale up over time.
Can that be applied through the NPDES requirements then? I mean, so if the county or municipalities did that, how would you?
Well, I'll give you an example. So, you have the Rehoboth project right now, right? And so, there's a lot of different opinions on it. I mean, I'm kind of the mindset that we need to get the nutrients out of the inland bays. I've kind of come to that conclusion painfully, as John knows, because I keep asking his team for more information. But if you did the same thing there, a $30 million project. So if you reduce the interest rate, you could free up $3 or $4 million for stormwater improvements. Some of that could be gray, some of that could be green, but I mean, you can meet a bunch of water quality needs, reduce the amount of bacteria going into the ocean right there, and some of the other inland bays and the lakes, in a way that doesn't add to their cost. So you can kind of solve two problems, and then they can actually build that into their permit requirements on the stormwater side and say, hey, look, this is how we're going to meet it, and then they have a funding, so we have confidence it's actually an approvable plan. So also the education piece, I mean, it helps kind of fill it out. And this is one of the reasons why we pushed so hard with legislation last year, kind of putting all the water infrastructure under a single council that reports to myself and Secretary of Health and Social Services, so you can have these conversations. Because I mean, before, the idea of having a separate conversation, depending on where the water was in the system, was just crazy.
Have any others? No?
Yes, sir.
So I'm with the University of Delaware, and there's several of us here as graduate students from the university. And some of them are working on projects that deal with trying to kind of quantify what is the effectiveness of some of these practices. And there's still some large questions out there and not having any answers. And the challenge that we always face is to find funding. We're always trying to find funding for monitoring and studies and all that. And there's not really a willingness by many organizations to pay for that. So there's money to pay for putting projects on the ground, but the monitoring component becomes a minor aspect. So the thing what I was wondering about, because it's very excited that Delaware was going in this direction for implementing projects, what opportunities there would exist for academia, University of Delaware, and UNBC, to become more part of those type of projects, through funding graduate students and all that?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we're always stretched for not having enough monitoring money for kind of across the entire portfolio. I'd like to try to build in some of the project design costs, frankly, and just as there's education requirements, monitoring requirements. I mean, one of the things that in the stormwater regs, where you can kind of propose alternative green infrastructure approaches, trying to quantify those and making sure they're performing to the levels that were promised, is going to be a challenge. And if you're going to set a bar, you're making sure that folks actually achieve it. And so I don't know, Randy, if you have any thoughts at all. We talked about, in lieu fees and some other potential revenue streams that could help, capitalize some money for that type of work, as well as additional projects on the ground. You can obviously use some of the Clean Water Act money for that as well. But we should probably have a conversation offline, John and Randy, if you guys have any thoughts on kind of incorporating the verification into the projects. There's a little bit of resource available for the monitoring.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of the Chesapeake Bay program, is this whole accountability issue, and we've all got proposals in our whips of how we're going to do that, but we haven't got very far into the process yet, so it kind of remains to be seen how effective what we're proposing will work. But yeah, that is a very important part of the Chesapeake Bay program in particular.
There is a trend out there for incentivizing on the nutrient sediment side. It's following what's happening on the federal level for the compensatory mitigation process, where you can incentivize the folks to do it. If they can demonstrate beyond a base standard the performance, they get better credit. So they're infusing the dollars to take the extra money to do the monitoring, because they know on the back end they will make more money by doing the monitoring. So you put the cost back by incentivizing rather than making it regulatory in that regard.
Yeah, and then there's two ways to incentivize that, right? One is with kind of monetary or permitting certain rewards. The second is actually through kind of trading mechanisms. We're still trying to sort out at a reasonable level. But no, you're exactly right. But we should have that conversation because I think as we're seeing more kind of projects come in kind of at larger scale, making sure they're achieving the promise. I think it's going to be a credibility test, an accountability test, as Randy was saying, going forward. Yes?
Just last week, the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate introduced a bill called the Innovative Stormwater Infrastructure Act.
Yes.
And what can governors, directors statewide do to make sure this legislation passes? Because that would, and it would fund groups for environmental excellence at a regional level that could fund the monitoring, fund the implementation, which we don't have the money for. MS4 permits are pretty much federal mandates that are unfunded. I don't know if there's some type of national group that can make sure this passes.
Yeah, I always get worried when the question starts to, anything about Congress. We need Republican sponsors. It's almost entirely Democratic sponsors at this point. And so you don't have a single person in leadership that's anywhere near that bill because of the fiscal loan attached to it. And so, I think there are potentially some opportunities through WRDA, the WRDA Conference Committee, the Water Resources Development Act, that you can integrate some of these principles. We've been trying to layer in some things there as well as in the Farm Bill. But I think it's going to be easier to try to figure out ways to affect the kind of mandatory statutory enabling legislation that has to pass, at least usually used to have to pass, than it is to try and get a standalone like that. I think I read a synopsis the other day. It's good stuff, but there's no champion right now in the majority to figure out how to get that done. I do think that if we can come back and say, look, that type of work, or even allowing slightly more flexibility through a state capitalization grant or state, just basic state grant through a PPA through 319 or something, to allow that kind of flexibility to use it towards some of those purposes, even if the amount got reduced. And this gets back to the sequester debate, where giving us more flexibility and giving the states more well, flexibility is the right word, about how we use those dollars if they're going to be cut, to allow us to do things exactly like that is probably a better mechanism than assuming a new revenue stream could ever get through the current juggernaut that is the U.S. Congress.
Any other questions? No? Well, if we could thank Collin.
Thank you.